I listened to 10 terrifying hospice stories from menors, and what they witnessed will haunt you. I never should have opened that door. The smell hit me first like damp earth mixed with something sweet and decayed. My breath caught. It was too late to turn back, though. Curiosity gnawed at me. What stories lay behind those closed curtains? I was just a regular person, going about my mundane days. Work, coffee, a Netflix binge every now and then. But that morning something felt off. The air in the hospice was thick, almost suffocating. The lights flickered like they were caught in a fight between dimness and despair. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The hallways were drenched in shadows, their shapes shifting with every flick from the fluorescent bulbs above. I could hear whispers, barely audible, floating through the gloom. Were they real? Or was my mind playing tricks on me? The coolness wrapped around me like a tight hug, but not a comforting one. I tugged at my sweater, wishing for warmth. Then came the noises, a creaking that felt rooted in the darkness. It was sudden, cutting through the silence like a knife. I glanced nervously at the empty rooms. Were they really empty? I stared at the doorways, my heart racing, imagining what might be lurking just beyond them. A chair scraped against the floor, sending chills up my arms. Was it the wind? Or something more sinister? As I rounded the corner, something out of the corner of my eye jerked my gaze. The curtains fluttered as if someone had just passed through. My heart thudded loudly in my chest. I felt my fists clench. Doubt washed over me. I wanted to scream, to run. But my feet felt glued to the cold tile floor. There was a figure standing down the hall. It loomed just beyond my sight, shrouded in the darkness, waiting. My breath came shallow and quick. Every instinct told me to flee, but I took a step forward. My curiosity gnawed at me, urging me on. What had these nurses seen? What empty skeletons lurked in these quiet rooms? Suddenly, I heard a whisper right next to me. "Help me!" My blood ran cold. I spun around, and there was nothing but shadows. The silence before the storm chilled my skin as I stood at the edge of that abyss, my heart hammering in fear. What if I was not alone? What had I stumbled into? Hey! Before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon, and while you're there, smash that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The haunting escalated as I stood there, frozen in the suffocating silence. The darkness around me almost pulsating with an unnatural energy. I pressed my back against the wall, the coolness seeping through my sweater, and strained to listen for that voice again. Maybe it had just been my mind conjuring a phantom. But then I heard Ida's soft, raspy breath that felt too close. Help me! It twisted my insides like a vice. I wasn't certain if I was imagining it or if the shadows themselves were calling, their specters yearning for release. It grew louder, echoing through the empty corridor, wrapping around me like a chain. Who are you? My own voice trembled, and the question felt inadequate, almost foolish in that overwhelming dread. In response, the walls shuddered, a low creaking sound reverberating through the air, as if the very institution were alive, old, decaying, a mausoleum for lost souls. I took a tentative step down the hall, the whispers now a symphony of despair, growing in number until they filled my ears like an overwhelming tide. With each step, the heaviness thickened, like walking through molasses. The air felt charged as if I had crossed an unseen threshold, stepping fully into the realm of something dark and ancient. And then, without warning, a door swung open down the corridor. I flinched, the hinges creaking mournfully. A figure stood there, an old woman, her hair a tangle of gray, eyes wide and glistening like an untouched moonlit pool. She wore a hospital gown soaked through, her frail hands trembling at her sides as if she were nearing the end of an excruciating performance. "Please," she rasped, "you have to run." Something before she could finish. Her form flickered like a dying bulb, almost vanishing into the shadows surrounding her. I blinked, my body screaming at me to retreat, but I pressed forward, hunger for understanding outweighing my fear. What do you mean? I begged. Don't let it touch you, she shrieked suddenly, her voice breaking into a piercing wail that echoed against the walls, cutting through me. The very walls seemed to pulse as if they throbbed with her scream. Just as abruptly as she appeared, the old woman was swallowed into the darkness, leaving nothing but silence in her wake. My heart raced, thumping violently against my ribcage as I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. I turned to flee, but the corridor felt infinite, stretching beyond the confines of reason. A chill crawled up my spine, and the whispers transformed into a cacophony of desperate pleas, their tones blending together into a haunting reverie. Help, don't touch! I surged forward, longing to escape, yearning for the safety of the outside world and the sunlight. Thomas, one of the nurses I had spoken to earlier, had mentioned an incubating darkness, something he barely understood, something that had taken hold of the hospice like a parasite feeding off the despair of the dying. Was this it? Were the souls trapped within this place reaching out for help, their lives reduced to desperate cries echoing through the ages? Suddenly, the severe chill culminated into an overwhelming sense of presence looming over my shoulder. It felt like fingers brushing against my neck, icy tendrils inviting me to turn around. I choked back a scream, but the overwhelming urge to look back was intoxicating. The shadows writhed, and from the depths of the darkness a face emerged, a grotesque mockery of humanity, its features sharpened by malice, eyes glinting with a predatory hunger. Stay, it hissed, and my body, betraying me, halted in its tracks. Panic gripped my throat as the entity stretched its hand forward, fingertips splintering into elongated claws as it beckoned me closer. The whispers grew louder, a crescendo of fear and agony that reverberated throughout my mind. My existence felt like an illusion, and the darkness called to me with an irresistible allure that I felt myself being drawn into the void as I stood there, caught between terror and the unquenchable thirst for the forbidden knowledge. The last sliver of my sanity slipped through my fingers as the world around me faded to black. And then, just before the darkness swallowed me whole, I heard the old woman's voice once more, echoing through the abyss. Run, before it's too late. And then everything plunged into silence. What happened next was beyond comprehension. The light flickered violently, and the walls began to bleed shadows. I realized I was not alone anymore. A chorus of weeping souls surrounded me, their faces twisted in agony as they reached for me, trapped between realms. Panic surged in my veins, and just as I turned to run, the ground beneath me trembled, and I fell into an unseen chasm as I plummeted. The empty, endless space around me twisted into a horrifying sight, a glimpse of what lay beneath the hospice itself. Endless hallways of despair, rooms filled with restless souls, and somewhere in that infinite darkness, something far worse awaited. And just before I lost my grip on reality, a voice as old as time itself rasped through the void, sending a shiver down my spine. Welcome to the hospice's purgatory. You'll never leave. The fall jostled me into a disorienting daze, where moments blurred into a cacophony of sound and image. Shadows danced, contorting around me as I landed with a heavy thud, the ground unforgiving and cold beneath me. As I struggled to steady my breath, the choking dark closed in around me, suffocating any remnants of rational thought. I pushed myself up, trembling and disoriented, feeling not just the chill of the air but the oppressive weight of countless unseen eyes measuring me with unsettling curiosity. The whispers resumed, louder this time, swelling like a rising tide, words laced with anguish, echoing stories of their final breaths, unfulfilled desires lingering in a space that felt both alien and agonizingly familiar. Help us, save us, the voices merged, layering one on top of the other until they became a single, maddening entity. My own heartbeat pounded in rhythm with the desperate mantra as if it were the gathering drumbeat of despair itself. I lurched to my feet and took stock of my surroundings. The vastness stretched infinitely, but then I saw them, doorways standing ajar, grotesque and twisted, revealing slivers of rooms entwined with despair. Each path led to tunnels that beckoned with the promise of salvation or further torment. From the darkness within, faint silhouettes flitted just outside my Visiona child. An elderly man, lovers entwined in a waltz that never ceased. Their faces wavered in my mind, slipping from clarity to horror, leaving behind only echoes of their wails. Then something shifted, a movement at the edge of my sight, a flicker of a pale hand reaching out from one doorway. Instinct screamed within me to flee, but curiosity, insatiable and reckless, compelled me to approach. I crept closer, heart pounding against my ribs each time the shadows seemed to recoil from my presence. Please were trapped. A child's voice trembled from the darkness, a sound so fragile it shattered the very silence of this purgatory. I steeled my resolve as I stepped into the room, its interior a time-worn tableau of forgotten memories, an old bed, a faded teddy bear perched on a shelf, and an empty chair that swayed, as if a gentle phantom still occupied it. "Who are you?" I whispered, scared of what might respond. Silence greeted me, thick and dense, but I felt the weight of eyes on me once more, the shadows pulsating with a malice that sent chills down my spine. "They won't let us go," the child's voice returned, softer now, fragile like dust motes in moonlight. "They are always hungry. They want to keep us." Before I could inquire further, shadows from the corners of the room surged forward, drawn to me like moths to a flame, whispering my name in a chorus that felt all too intimate. "Do not invite it in, do not touch." Echoes of the old woman's warnings flourished in my memory, battling against the curiosity and need to understand that I stumbled back, heart racing as the oppressive shadows thickened, squeezing the air from my lungs. Suddenly, there was an electric pulse in the atmosphere, a sense of something awakening, something ancient and dreadful. My surroundings trembled as I bolted from the room, intentions to escape raging within me, but the corridors twisted ever more, morphing into a labyrinth of nightmarish proportions as I sprinted blindly onward. The whispers grew louder, intertwining back into that dreadful song of lamentation, wrapping around me like vines looking to ensnare. I turned and twisted, frantic to escape the escalating dark, but it was insidious, weaving itself into the very fabric of my thoughts. "Help us," the voices begged, growing desperate. "Help us!" Each pleading whisper clawed at my sanity. But through the chaos, a flicker of light sparked in the distance, dim, but resolute. My heart surged with determination as I raced toward it, arms flailing as I stumbled over unseen obstacles, drawing closer to the glow that pierced the claustrophobic darkness. Just as my fingers brushed against the ephemeral light, a figure leapt into view before me, a tall silhouette with elongated limbs and a face twisted into an expression of pure hunger. Lips curled back to reveal rows of jagged teeth glistening with malice. "Do you wish to be saved?" it hissed, the very question laden with horror. "Or are you here to join them?" The light flickered precariously, a final warning pulsing against the cacophony of pleas that wrapped around me, urging me to decide. In that split second of decision, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, and chaos erupted as the walls writhed, pulling the very essence of reality apart. And then, just as the grotesque entity lunged forward, limbs outstretched with ravenous hunger, the light extinguished everything, plunged into a suffocating void, and I was left hanging in an abyss between despair and the unknown. "Welcome," the entity whispered, its voice weaving into my marrow, "to the point of no return." And suddenly I was not alone. The shadows surged, rushing toward me in a dark tide, and all I could do was scream as the world around me collapsed into a vortex of terror. The darkness swallowed my scream, muffling it like a shroud, rendering me voiceless. My heart raced while time itself felt like it held its breath, suspended within an endless echo of dread. The embrace of the abyss tightened as the shadows whirled around me, ink-like tendrils brushing against my skin, stirring a visceral panic beneath my very being. That I blinked, hoping to wake from this nightmarish illusion, but nothing changed. I remained ensnared, surrounded by a void that felt hungry. The whispers, once distant, encroached upon me with an urgency that cascaded over my senses. Help us," they crescendoed into a haunting symphony, a desperate plea woven into the fabric of the darkness, urging me to take action, to reaffirm my humanity amidst the madness. With trembling limbs, I pushed against the ground, searching for something solid to anchor myself. I couldn't tell if I was standing or falling, The very concept of direction no longer existed. It was as if the shadows were alive, breathing and pulsating with anticipation. Their manipulation of space twisted perception, drawing closer and then retreating into the void, taunting me with their elusive presence. And then I felt Ida's cool breath against my neck, unnervingly intimate skeletal fingers trailing down my back like cold steel. I whipped around, prepared to confront the grotesque silhouette, but instead, I stumbled into a space that shifted kaleidoscopically, as if dimensions were ripping apart. All around me morphed remnants of forgotten existences. A hospital room anchored at the edges of memory, sterile and smothering, the scent of antiseptic clinging to the air. In an adjacent chair, a figure hunched over, their face shrouded in shadows but vulnerable in posture. It was an old nurse, her matted hair hanging like cobwebs over a face creased with soul-deep lines. Eyes like dark pools flickered with urgency, reflecting a world beyond comprehension. "Leave, don't stay," she rasped, voice breaking, a sharp tremor that cracked the very air. "They'll take you, oh God, they'll take you too. You can't help them." Horror clawed at my insides as I felt the shadows ripple again, their hunger thirsty for more souls. "We can help them together," I murmured, unsure whether I sought to console her or steady myself. The figures surrounding us whispered in a feverish chant, drowning out my thoughts. Help us, it felt like 1,000 souls collided on that very point, their collective torment engulfing me, injecting me with a despair I had not known. But the nurse recoiled, her hands digging into the arms of her chair, knuckles whitening. "No, you don't understand. The ones who linger here, they are not innocent. They crave more, they are lost in their hunger." Something inside me cracked as the full weight of despair pressed upon my chest, choking me. I wanted to reach out, to connect, but dread gnawed as I thought of the entities, the maws gaping wide and the desperate embraces that awaited. I hesitated, feeling the shadows crawl closer, weaving around the nurse like a noose. Just then, she rose with surprising vigor, stepping away from the growing mass of darkness that sought to pull her into their depths. "You must run. If you hear their cries, turn away. They are not what they seem." Scarcely had she spoken when an anguished wail pierced the air, echoing from the back of the room. An apparition manifest Ida, sobbing woman, her face contorted in agony, eyes wide and glassy as they locked onto mine with a desperation that transcended life. Strands of long, dark hair floated around her like a shroud, and her mouth moved without sound, flapping like a fish gasping for breath. She pointed towards me, her anguish throbbing through the air, the shadows behind her erupting into a frenzy. "You must save me." Her voice clawed at my chest, pulling at me with tendrils of sorrow that felt like barbed wire. "Please, you must save us," echoed the chorus of shadows, now a storm, aimlessly tumultuous, alive with the extremes of grief and rage, cries intermingling with the frantic whispers of the nurse who begged me once more to flee. In a reckless surge of instinct, I turned, joining the nurse as we raced together through the quivering boundaries of the enchanted hospital room. But the corridor unraveled chaotically, spiraling endlessly, every door cursed, every path an illusion leading to more despair, and I felt the shadows encircle us, waiting for a moment of hesitation to seize upon our souls. "Run!" she cried again, but it was too late. As we faltered, the light flickered, dimming until only silhouettes of anguished figures remained, their mouths agape in an eternal scream. And just as I caught my breath, a freezing hand grasped my wrist, a hand that pulled me backward, toward the wailing woman. The last whispered words fell from the nurse's lips like a prayer. "You'll never escape." The darkness exploded into laughter, and as it filled my ears, the pull escalated, the shadows squeezing tighter, leading me toward a fate I could never have imagined. Just as I felt my body reeling toward the source of despair, I glimpsed the nurse's face one last time, her warning now silent, her eyes wide as she too vanished into the swarm with agonizing certainty. I understood that I had not run far enough, not far enough to escape, and I could feel the shadows wrapping around me, ready to consume what little hope remained. In the cacophony of lost souls, I raised my eyes, pleading against the void, and the laughter subsided into a hushed silence, a chilling lull that curled my insides. "Welcome back, came the ghastly whisper from the depths of the veil as the darkness flared. I realized then, my fate had already been sealed. "Why don't you stay with us forever?" The air thickened around me, taking on an oppressive quality that pressed against my chest like a vice. I stood paralyzed, the shadows flashing through my mind like sinister specters of despair, each one agonizingly familiar. The remnants of the nurse's face haunted me, her wide eyes a stark reminder that I was now irrevocably entwined with the darkness. "Why don't you stay with us forever?" The whisper curled around my ears, venomous and sweet like a lover's caress, dragging me deeper into the abyss. The desolation surged back, filling every inch of the room, and I could barely think through the tempest of sorrow that had now settled within me. "Help us!" A collective scream erupted from all sides, resonating in a gut-wrenching chorus that drew me back to my surroundings. The faces of lost souls twisted into grotesque shapes, each one reaching out with skeletal hands, their eyes hollow yet filled with a longing that chilled my marrow. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and collided against something solid, a wall draped in darkness, a boundary held only by shadows hungry for more. "Please," I gasped, "let me go." But as I turned to flee, the shadows surged forward like a tidal wave, swallowing every escape route. There was only one way now. I had to face the source of this terror. The weeping woman, still beckoning me from the encroaching darkness. Her voice, barely more than a choked whisper, echoed in my skull. "Help me. Help us. Only you can break the bond." As I focused on her visage, I felt a connect Iona thread binding us together, a flicker of humanity within her torment. "I want to help," I said, the words bursting forth despite my fears. "How can I save you?" The room around her shimmered, and for a moment, the chaos receded. I could see the woman's features more clearly, her anguished face marred by tears that trickled like rivers of sorrow flowing down her pale cheeks. "You must look into the light," she implored, her expression shifting to one of desperate urgency, as if my fate hung in the balance. "But beware the shadows, they will try to trap you." My gaze darted beyond her trembling figure, spotting a glimmer of light flickering at the far end of the chamber. It was the first semblance of hope I'd seen, a beacon cut into the veil of despair. I felt an instinctual pull, a blend of fear and determination as I stepped forward. With every step, the shadows hissed and crawled, their presence like a cold wind that swept through my very essence. "Run!" they shrieked in a cacophony of anguish, each voice more horrifying than the last. I could hear them closer now, clawing at my psyche, their whispers slithering into my mind, sowing seeds of doubt. "Stay with us. Join us. You will find peace and you will know the truth." I shouted, the word erupting in defiance against the encroaching darkness that threatened to envelop me whole. I had come too far, seen too much to surrender now. Fixing my focus on the woman, I pressed onward, spurred by the promise of light, her pleas echoing inside me as if lighting a fire against the encroaching void. I reached the edge of the light and was engulfed by a pulsating energy that surged through me, illuminating twisted remnants of the hospital that had become my prison. The shadows curled beneath the illumination, their whispers now drowned out by a soft, melodious hum that washed over me, clearing the fog in my mind. "Take my hand," the woman cried, extending a frail limb that seemed to shake with unseen forces. I could feel the warmth of her desperation radiating through the air. But even as I closed the distance, a deafening roar echoed around. Meth shadows erupted in fervor, their howling crescendo vibrating through the walls as they lunged for both of you. I yelled, lunging toward her, desperate to grasp her hand. But the proximity snapped a thread in my heart. The moment my fingertips brushed against her palm, the shadows hesitated, drawn to the light emanating from us but unable to breach the boundary. In that moment of contact, the surrounding chaos froze, and the whispers dimmed to a silence thick enough to drown in. You can save them," she whispered urgently, "but first, you must face the truth within." Before I could respond, the ground shuddered violently as shadows twisted into a whirlpool, the spiraling darkness erupting around us. I felt the pull of the abyss wrenched from beneath, eager to swallow the light whole. "We don't have much time." I turned to her, feeling a rippling force surge through the air, my hand tightening around hers. But suddenly, an unseen force yanked me backward, as if the very essence of the shadows sought to unravel the connection we'd made. I felt her fingers slip from mine, the light wavering, flickering dimly as the darkness roared louder, a feral cacophony threatening to envelop everything I once knew. As I fought against the tide, fear clutched my throat, and I screamed for her, for myself, for all those lost. Would the truth be my salvation, or my doom? Just then, a blinding flash of light erupted around us, and I was ripped away from the grasp of shadows, sent spiraling down into an eternal fall, plunging deeper into the unknown. I gasped as nausea seized me, a churning despair swallowing all that surrounded me. And then, like a thunderclap striking the night, I felt a presence looming behind me, waiting, watching. I turned, heart racing, only to confront a face emerging through the darkness, a ghastly visage that smiled with eternal hunger. "Welcome back," it whispered, a chilling promise that sent ice coursing through my veins. In that moment, I knew, for certain, I had awakened a greater horror than I could ever comprehend. And then, imploding into the void, I understood this was far from over. The moment I collided with the ground, the substance beneath me was cold and slick, a macabre reminder of life extinguished. I lay breathless, my limbs heavy as if weighted down by the very darkness that had pulled me here. The air hummed with an eerie silence, broken only by the faint echo of my heartbeat reverberating against the cavernous walls of the space. "Is anyone there?" I whispered, a futile plea that met only the void. The shadows that had previously clawed at me now swirled lazily above, as if they had momentarily lost interest in their prey. Yet I knew they could return at any moment. I forced myself to sit up, clinging to the remnants of hope that flickered like a distant star within my chest. The world around me was painted in shades of despair, a warped reflection of the hospice I had endured. The walls were now draped in a sepulchral gloom, decorated with inscriptions I couldn't decipher, but their essence felt unbearably familiar, as though they were echoing my own thoughts of sorrow and dread. That I pushed myself to my feet, the slick ground sloshing underfoot. As I stood, I felt the disquieting sensation of eyes upon me, lurking just outside the edges of my vision. "Show yourselves," I demanded, rage fueling my voice, but the shadows merely swirled, their silence mocking my courage. Then, like insect legs crawling across my skin, the whispers returned, softer yet impossibly more sinister. "You are where you belong." A chorus of voices twined together in a rhythm that droned into my skull, sending tremors through my body. "Stay with us. You will never be alone." "Leave me," I shrieked, the last remnants of my will shattering into fragments. "I will not be your prisoner." The ground shifted beneath me, and I stumbled back, feeling the echoes of countless souls clawing at the edges of my reality, a desperate chorus of longing. Among them, I caught a glimpse of faces woven into the shadows, twisted reflections of pain. The nurse's visage emerged, her mouth a hair's breadth from mine, yet filled with an abyssal silence. I felt her horror, her fear, clinging to me even across dimensions. I gasped, ducking my head, attempting to shield myself from the weight of her sadness. I needed to move, needed to put distance between myself and this gathering storm of souls. I ran, propelled by instinct and the glimmer of light I could still conjure within. As I sprinted through the trembling dark, I realized I was not alone. Something moved in the periphery, trailing just outside the folds of my sight, a massive shadow gaining, stretching and elongating as if it were a predator, sizing up its prey. I dared a glance and froze. It was a creature crafted of nightmares, a hulking mass of writhing shadows and ghastly faces. They screamed silently, their grotesque expressions contorted in eternal agony, pleading for release. It surged forward, its covered form rippling with a violent hunger. I knew, instinctively, that it fed on fear, on despair. I bolted, the weight of impending doom urging me into a broken sprint. The creature roared, a sound that reverberated through my bones as it followed, a horrific echo that intertwined with the cries of the damned. Panic flooded my senses as I veered into a narrow corridor where walls pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, bathed in a sickly green glow. Each frantic breath I drew filled my lungs with the taste of dread. The memories of those trapped here clawed at the edges of my consciousness, reminding me of their fates lost within this dark purgatory. Helpless, the whispers merged into my thoughts, drowning out my reason. The shadows pressed closer, and I felt the chill of their fingers grazing my skin, urging me towards the light I had glimpsed earlier. The ground trembled, fissuring beneath my feet in protest. A mighty battle of willslight against darkness, hope against despair as I reached for the faint luminescence. The dim glow morphed into a doorway, its outline pulsating gently like a heartbeat. I hesitated at the threshold, fear curling in my stomach as I heard the creature behind me unleashing a nightmarish howl, a final warning that I could feel seep into my veins. "Come back," the shadows whispered, their allure tightening around my heart, tugging me into their depths. Just as I prepared to plunge into the light, a strong hand grabbed my ankle, yanking me back with a force that ignited the very marrow of my bones. With a strangled yell, I turned to see a familiar face, the nurse, her features twisted with anguish. "You must face it," she screamed, desperation laced through her words. "You must choose." Unable to breathe, I glared into her eyes, searching for the salvation she promised but feeling only terror. The creature loomed closer, and as she held my gaze, I understood. This was not just about escaping. It was about confronting the truth that lay within. But as the shadows tightened around us, I felt the gnawing awareness crawl deeper. Perhaps the truth did not wish to be uncovered. Maybe the horrors within held secrets meant to bury me forever. And just then, the piercing light erupted behind me, expanding as I felt another shift, a crack in reality itself. The threshold wavered, desperate to pull me in, while the creature loomed at my back, ready to reclaim me as one of its own. And in that moment of paralyzing choice, I heard her voice cutting through the chaos. "Only you can break the bond. One had mere seconds to decide, into the light or succumb to shadows." And so, with the universe hanging on the precipice of terror, I chose. The light pulled at me with an almost sentient force, its brilliant tendrils reaching out, promising respite and answers. But behind me, the creature surged, its breath a fetid cauldron of despair that roiled through the air. I felt the nurse's grip slide from my ankle, her eyes widening in a silent plea as I wavered at the threshold, to stay or to go, to confront or flee. But I was done with hiding. My heart pounding in my ears, I dove into the light. The sensation was like plunging into icy water. Every limb felt alight with shock, and for a split second, I forgot the shadows that pursued me, absorbed in the brilliance that enveloped me. There was silence then, a profound stillness, as though the universe was holding its breath. I hung suspended in this vibrant void, drowning in peace, a temporary reprieve from the horrors that stalked me. But the tranquility shattered like glass as dread slithered back, and I found myself standing in another dimly lit room, another fragment of the hospicia, twisted semblance of the world I had known. The light faded, leaving behind a bone-chilling darkness that wrapped itself around me. Tight as a noose, I was in a small, sterile room, the smell of antiseptic clinging pungently to the air. A single flickering fluorescent light buzzed above, illuminating a stark white bed devoid of linen's symbolic grave. Shadowy figures moved furtively at the periphery, whispering in tones laced with despair. Their whispers weaved into my mind, spiraling with heart-wrenching intensity. "This is your past," one voice murmured, hollow and echoing like a funeral dirge. "You remember, don't you?" Every breath sharpened, and I turned slowly, recognizing the faces of those who had lingered on the threshold of death while I had cared for them. Their bodies, cloaked in shadows, seemed faceless, yet I could feel their eyes boring into my soul, a chorus of the forgotten drinking from the well of my guilt. "You were supposed to save us," they wailed, their mouths contorting in pain yet making no sound. I staggered backward, the weight of their judgment pressing against my chest. "Why did you abandon us?" "No," I cried, my voice cracking. I tried to help you." "Help?" Another voice slithered through the darkness, cool and mocking. "Did you really? Or did you simply prolong their suffering?" A scorching memory ignited within me, sitting at the bedside of a young woman, a mother, whose labored breaths whispered her imminent demise. I had witnessed her eyes lose their spark too soon. Had I done everything I could? Or did I merely delay her release, ensnared by my own desperation to fight a battle I could never win? A choice was made, and we linger still, the voices echoed, rising in crescendo. You belong with us now. The room trembled as icicles of despair shattered all around me, piercing the ground with a sickening thud. I turned to flee, only to be met by a wall of darkness pouring in, swallowing me whole. Frantic, I looked for an exit, but the familiar corridors twisted and warped, leading me back to that same sterile room, cyclically taunting me with my own failures. Face us. They cried in unison, a wailing sound that clawed at my insides. Faces emerged from the blackness pale, sunken, and filled with unspeakable sorrow. There was the young mother, eyes glazed with bitterness, and the old man whose fingers had clutched mine tightly in his last moments. They swarmed around me, shadows stretching to encompass every inch of the room. Their presence a nightmare too tangible to ignore. I gasped as one of them reached forward, a ghastly hand extending toward me, icy and beckoning. I felt the chill of its grip enveloping my throat, squeezing, and suddenly all my past failures crashed down on me like a tidal wave. I could feel their agony coiling around me, binding me in a last desperate attempt at freedom. I screamed, "What do you want from me?" The flickering light above crackled violently, casting a ballroom of dim reflections around the room that took a life of their own. The figures joined into a mass, their mouths forming a single answer. Remember your choice. As if acknowledging their command, time warped and shifted. Images flooded into my mind, flashes of the hospice, moments with each soul I had failed. The laughter, the tears, the eventual departures. Some laughter echoed sweetly, while others echoed cry over cry of bitter regret. And just as the figures closed in on me, their collective memory rising around me like reap stage fog, it swept me away again, an endless spiral laced with terror. The shadows withheld the complete truth, but their hunger pulsed, becoming ever more insistent. In the vortex of their sorrow, the final echo mocked me. You will choose again. Suddenly, darkness lifted like the parting of curtains, and I found myself standing in front of another doorway, this one etched with dark and pulsing symbols, whispers curling around it like smoke, demanding I cross the threshold. Inside, I heard weeping and gnashing, familiar voices calling my name. The choice was before me again. Would I step into the shadows to confront this new horror, or flee back to the succor of the unknown? Before I could decide, the door's handle began to twist, and I braced myself against the impending flood of icy despair, ready to learn what nightmares awaited on the other side. And as footsteps echoed from within, converging toward me with terrifying purpose, I realized it wasn't just my life hanging in the balance. It was the lives of those I attempted to forget. As the door creaked open, a fresh wave of screams engulfed me, and my eyes widened in terror at the sight before me, a fusion of the past and the living unclaimed, intertwining in ways my mind could scarcely fathom. The truth demanded to be unveiled, but at what cost? The shadows surged forth, hungry, their feast only just beginning. As the door swung wide, the cries morphed into a chilling cacophony, a symphony of lament resonating deep within my bones. The room beyond was dimly lit, shadows writhing in corners like angry spirits. I stepped inside, hesitant, the hairs on my arms standing on end as the air thickened with an oppressive terror that seeped into my lungs. The scene unfolded before me, grotesque yet mesmerizing. Bodies intertwined in a dance of agonia, haunting tableau of the deceased and the dying. But it was the faces that ripped at my sanity, their eyes pleading, mouths twisted in frozen screams, mouths that would never utter a sound. They stared through me as if demanding my recognition, my acknowledgement of the suffering they endured as I cared for them, day after day, without enough nights of sleep in between. I in the center of the room. A circular table rippled with dark energy, and upon it laid an array of objects. A rusted stethoscope, an open vial of poison, a child's teddy bear frayed at the seams. My breath caught in my throat as I reached out, mesmerized by the objects that beckoned like sirens. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a gaunt, wraith-like woman, her hollow cheeks and lifeless eyes sending icy fear coursing through me. "Oh, you see?" she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dead leaves. Each object tells a story. Each story is a choice. The weight of her words pressed heavily upon my mind, twisting and turning like the vines creeping along the walls, tightening their grip. My eyes darted back to the stethoscope. It gleamed ominously in the bluish light. I recalled all those moments spent trying to hear the faintest whispers of life within those frail bodies, fighting against the inevitability of death. My heart sank. I had hoped that my presence would delay the end, but now it felt like a cruel deception. Choose wisely, the woman intoned, her voice echoing through the shadows, each syllable pregnant with malignant power. For the next choice you make will bind you. As it affixed the others, a surge of dread engulfed me. I turned my gaze toward the vial of poison. Its contents shimmered ominously, and in the depths of my soul, I felt the shadows swirl, whispering haunting stories of those loved ones who begged me for release, longing for the torment to end. The truth clanged in my mind like the tolling of a death knell. Could it be I had held the key to their peace all along? No, I shouted, my voice rising above the fray. I would never, nor would they, the woman countered, her eyes narrowing, feeding off my turmoil. But the choice was never yours to make holy. You were their ward, their keeper. Which sin do you wish to atone for? The mercy or the cruelty? I staggered backward, grappling with the weight of her words. Panic clawed at my insides as flickering memories cascaded, witnessing family members in anguish, the desperate whispers of longing for release following their prolonged suffering, the guilt gnawing at my heart every time I advised against letting go. But to betray their plea for peace? My stomach turned. The room warped, shadows flickering with violent intensity as spectral hands reached for me, grasping at my clothing, my skin, their cold touch igniting a desperate need to escape. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but where? I did not know. The cries faded into a dull thrum, merging with the revelation settling like ash in my throat. Choose, the spectral woman declared, extending her frail hand toward the table, beckoning me closer to the cursed objects that lay upon it. Your choice will determine if your soul is condemned to the shadows or if you can awaken from this nightmare. Before I could resist, myself urged forward by an unseen force. I reached for the stethoscope, its rusted metal cold against my palm. A part of me wanted to hear their hearts beat once more, if only to dispel the darkness, to drown out the screams that chased me. But another lurking uncertainty whispered restless warnings. What if that choice condemned me? As I grappled with the stethoscope, a blinding pain erupted in my head. The images of those I had failed to save blurred into a whirlwind of faces, moments, tragedies captured in still frames of loss. Each image merging with the last, a heady cocktail of guilt and grief spilling over. I knew I needed clarity to decide, but clarity was lost amid the whirlwind, and the shadows thrived on my indecision. Choose, screamed the room in brutal unison. The cacophony rose until it practically echoed through the very fabric of my being, rumbling violently, walls trembling, the shadows around me undulating with paranoia and the dance of salvation versus damnation. Which shall lead? The spectral woman questioned, her breath a cold gust that carried with it the rasp of despair. Time twisted, and I all at once felt the primordial binding of intention and consequence. I could solidify my role as savior, the moral anchor wading through uncharted waters, or plunge down a dark path of mercy, severing the thread of anguish. But just as I summoned the resolve to make that fateful choice, an earth-shattering rumble shook the room. The walls cracked as though split by an unseen wrath. The flickering light bulb overhead shattered, plunging the room into suffocating darkness. Darkness that hummed with palpable energy, primal and alive, and oh, I screamed against the chaos. Not now. The souls surrounding me wailed, their cries rising into an unbearable pitch that clawed at my sanity. And then something shifted in the shadows. A hulking figure emerged, far more terrifying than the wraith before. Its presence engulfed the remnants of light, consuming the air like a predator lurking patiently. Your choice must be made. It growled, low and grave, the very essence of dread. Or face the reckoning with all that you have ignored. That I felt teetering on the precipice of terror, my heart racing, every instinct screaming to retreat. But I knew I could not run from the truth forever. And as reality blurred, crystallizing around me like the shards of a fractured mirror, I finally understood. The choice wasn't merely a reflection of my past. It was the gateway to the foreboding fate of collective souls clamoring for release as the darkness pressed in. Eager to snuff out my flickering flame, I whispered, "I'll choose." But before I could declare my decision, the ground trembled, and an overwhelming scream erupted from the shadows, colliding with the very core of my soulless scream that seemed to merge into one anguished, desperate essence. And then silence. The silence wrapped around me like a burial shroud, constricting and heavy. The air was thick with dread, an oppressive force that weighed down my thoughts and left me gasping for clarity. Instinctively, I dropped the rusted stethoscope, its weighty decision replaced by the sudden urgency to escape the encroaching darkness. That I turned to the wraith-like woman, who still lingered amidst the shadows. Her empty eyes seemed to flicker with an unsettling light, feeding off the fear that coursed through me. She took a hesitant step forward, and in that moment, I noticed the faintest shudder of her former ripple of something beneath the surface, as if she were losing cohesion or feebly fighting to remain corporeal in the depths of this hellish domain. "The choice was yours to make," she murmured, her voice quivering like a candle in the wind. "But choosing to resist will only make the shadows thirstier." That I stumbled backward, my back colliding against the table, sending the vial of poison rattling, teetering dangerously close to the edge. A sense of desperation enveloped me, a primal instinct to flee, to remain untouched by this grotesque tableau of suffering and regret. But the shadows were relentless, enveloping my escape route as if rooting me to the spot. Suddenly, the darkness shifted, revealing more figures emerging from the abyss. They were distorted, their bodies twisted in unnatural stances. Yet their faces, those faces held an unmistakable familiarity. Each visage was a patient I had cared for, each one bearing the weight of anguish and unanswered pleas. Tears glimmered in their eyes as they reached for me, desperate and forlorn. "Help us," they whispered in unison, their voices barely above a threadbare lullaby, weaving in and out of my psyche like a fever dream. We were not meant to suffer like this. That I closed my eyes tightly, turning my head away, but their cries pierced the darkest recesses of my mind, reverberating against the walls of my conscience. I had tried to hold their hands through the pain, to speak their fears, to shield them from what lay ahead. But each of those patients had met an end I had fought so ardently against, each death a stark reminder of my frailty as a caregiver. "Please," I screamed, overwhelmed by screams both past and present cascading down on me like a torrential downpour. I glanced from the table to the horde of souls, and in a split second, terror twisted into something deep, a chilling realization. They didn't just want my acknowledgement. They wanted my absolution. The spectral woman lingered at the periphery, her gaze fixated on me as she revealed a smile that split the darkness, a knowing grin that suggested I was less a savior and more a custodian of their torment. "A choice is but an action, and now the reckoning demands yours." Suddenly, the ground beneath me trembled again, harder and more violently. Through the tremors, I heard a distant rumbling, like the roar of a great beast awakening from deep within the shadows, restless and furious. My stomach knotted as the temperature plummeted, the chilling aura swallowing every ounce of warmth in the room. Then came the whispers again, but they were different this time, more agitated, frantic. "You chose us," they chanted, their voices rising in a terrifying crescendo, growing louder, more demanding, their disappointment coiling around the air like barbed wire. The words fell flat on my tongue as the room contorted, warping around the explosive energy that burst from the darkness. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls, and an icy gust swept through, clawing at my skin, wrapping around my throat like a vengeful serpent. "Choose now." The monstrous presence growled, emerging from the void, nearly swallowing the last remnants of light. It was amorphous, a shifting silhouette comprised of every fear I ever faced stitched together, a dreadful collection of anguish, doubt, and regret forming a chaotic body more immense than any earthly creature. "Face the reckoning you have evaded for too long." It snarled, "Make your choice." Its voice shattered the air, the force of it, reverberating against my bones like thunder. My mind spiraled into a whirlpool of anxiety and despair, mercy or cruelty, salvation or damnation. the very essence of my purpose distilled into a singular moment. And then something stirred within me, a chaotic question winking to life. What if my release were intertwined with theirs? What if, by making this horrid choice, I could not only save myself but also deliver them? Could I forsake my humanity for the sake of their fleeting redemption? The shadows around me surged, hungry and wild, impatiently poised for my answer. As their whispers harmonized into one deafening chorus, a decision began to crystallize in my heart. But then, just as I gathered the strength to speak my truth, something broke through the darkness. An otherworldly flicker blazed across the room, illuminating everything in a malevolent glow. The tables turned, and everyone's faces twisted in shock. It revealed a lurid scene that set my blood to ice. The spectral woman was no longer alone. Beings of untold horror and suffering emerged, frantically pulling at the shadows as though trying to drag them back. She screamed, her voice rising above the chaos. The moment stretched, the air thickening with dread as my breath grew shallow, the impending inevitability of darkness crashing down on me. And then the ground erupted beneath my feet, and I was falling not into emptiness, but into the depths of their anguished memories. As bodies twisted like marionettes from the strings of fate, an unrelenting grip pulled me down into the abyss, drowning me in a flood of despair. With one horrific realization looming large, I was not the one choosing. I awoke in the heart of that accursed hospice, feeling the ground beneath me shift like quicksand. I staggered to my feet, the dim light struggling to penetrate the haze of darkness surrounding me. The sterile scent of antiseptic flooded my senses, but it was mingled with something far more sinister, echoes of suffering from 100 souls trapped within the walls. I glanced around the room, heart pounding as the memories of the last encounter crumbled around me. "What is happening?" I whispered, the question tasting bitter on my tongue. But before I could process the chaotic reality, shadows emerged, crawling along the walls, slithering over the faded photographs that adorned them, faces of those I had cared for. Their eyes hollow, mouths frozen in rictus of agony. Each one called out in a collective moan, a morose symphony echoing through the ether, resonating deep within the